Good evening, everybody. Happy Friday to you. Welcome to this edition of Soul School Sojourn. Aaron Tomlinson, my friend, and often, pretty frequent substitute co-host at this point. Welcome back as well, man. I know it was kind of last minute and quite literally last minute, but I so appreciate you. I appreciate you making the time and the effort to be on with us tonight.
For sure, man.
Yeah.
I love being here. So thanks again for the opportunity.
Yeah. And I got to be honest with you. It is always with a little bit of selfish motive that I ask you to be on because I enjoy our conversations so much. And we are both so busy through the week that it's really hard to sometimes get a phone call.
Yep.
However, we can make this work because the time seems to work. So thanks for being here, man. Welcome, everybody, as well. As you can see, Andrea is not with us again. As you know, Miss Carolyn, the matriarch of the Perrin family, passed a few weeks back now, and they're still taking some time just to be with family, and they just need some time. And so, continue to send, your prayers, your well wishes. Think of her in your meditation times, whatever your practice is, and however it is you practice what that practice is. Think of her, put her name out there, her family's name out there, her father's name out there. And, please, by all means, blow the comment section up in the live feed, as well as in the comments on the YouTube videos and Facebook Live with your well wishes, your condolences, and your love, because I know she'll read them and it will mean the world to her. And you know her heart. You know how she is. You know how big she does not get when she can't be here. So for her to not be here, she needs the time. So please keep her in your prayers and your thoughts. She loves you all dearly, and she is looking forward to being back with us all. But we just need to let them have their time and space and do what needs to be done. So we wish them the best tonight. We send them all the love we have. However it is we do that, we send it to them, and we bless them. So with all of that said, we're going to talk tonight about symbols, and we're going to talk about symbolism. And we're going to get into maybe some of the esoteric side of all of that, the religious side of that. And we're just going to kind of see where this conversation leads. But for the last couple of years, but really intensely for the last many months, I've not really been able to get this concept out of my mind. And I've really not been able to stop thinking about it, talking about. Aaron, I'm sorry, man. Do you have anything you want to say by way of greetings before I launch into my rapid fire intro?
No, it's fine. My heart and condolences goes out to Andrea and her family as well. And again, it's just an honor to be here. So, and looking forward to the topic because this is something I spend a lot of time thinking about as well. So
yeah.
Fun.
Yeah. And Aaron, I got to tell you, okay, so before I launch into the intro, I also want to say I consider myself so lucky and blessed to be able to have these conversations weekly with Andrea, with yourself, with the other guests we have on, with Rupert. There is just nothing quite as enlivening as a good conversation where you really connect with someone. And I've been thinking a lot about the concept lately of Martin Buber has a quote where he says, whenever two people engage in dialogue with one another, God is the electricity that flashes between them.
I like that.
And Jesus said, of course, wherever two or three gather in my name, I'm there in the midst of them. Napoleon Hill in Think and Grow Rich, that classics of self-help, he says, no two minds ever come together without something like a third mind emerging as a result. And I've been thinking a lot lately about that concept and how when you get in conversation, and maybe it has something to do with the fact that there are people watching the conversation as well. I don't know, but there's something about these conversations where at some point it really feels like it's more than just two people talking. And it almost feels like there is a third entity or a third mind.
Yeah,
and,
I agree.
And, Gurdjieff in the Gurdjieff work talks about everything works on that principle of the law of three. And there's like the positive and the negative, and then there's the neutralizing force. And then that when those three come together, this fourth kind of whole new thing emerges. In cognitive neuroscience, there's the concept of what's it called? Dialogos, where again, it's the same thing. When you're in dialogue with one another, there is a logos that seems to appear that is it's like God. It's like how God happens. You know,
Yeah,
if you
I
think of
like
God
that.
as a verb, that God happens. It's the electricity that flashes between, and then that's that third, maybe I don't know, in the Gurdjieffian sense. Maybe that's that third thing that brings two together, and then this whole new thing emerges. And I don't know. Every conversation I've ever had with you, my friend, I've felt that.
Yeah, me too, Jeff.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and so I look forward to that tonight, and I've been looking forward to the conversation all day, man, just for that very reason. And I love the way that new things come out of me, come to me like this. There just is nothing like having a conversation about things like this where there's no other agenda other than let's talk about the deepest, craziest, wildest, and wackiest stuff we can think about.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. Where else and when else do you get to do that? Right?
So true.
Maybe a drunken night here and there with some buddies, but I mean, anyways, man, all that to say, thanks for being here. I appreciate
You're
you
welcome.
a lot, my friend.
Yeah, I appreciate it too.
Yep. And that being the case, all the commenters too, feel free to chime in tonight, and I'll do my best to respond if there's something that's pertinent to the conversation. And yeah. So, anyways, on the topic of symbolism, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I've been thinking about this for the better part of a year, like intensely. And I think I've always been thinking about it in the background, even if I haven't known how to name it or what to name it. But I think there's a great quote, and I've heard it attributed to everybody from Carl Jung to Joseph Campbell to Rumi to, everything's always attributed to Rumi. He didn't say half the things people say he says, or Hafiz. Pretty much all the Hafiz and Rumi quotes you see in memes on the internet weren't said by either of them, just so you know. But the quote is, and maybe somebody knows the actual source, is that something like the world is not made of atoms, the world is made of stories.
Mm.
And I've thought a lot about that because Andrea and I have talked about the significance of numbers, because she and I, one of our consistent texts back and forth to one another is we both happen to look at the phone and it's 11:11, it's 3:33, it's 4:44, it's 5:55, it's something like that. And we always text each other at the same time, and she's like, beat me to it, And we've often said, and I think we've said it on the show even once, and I think it was her observation of something like, it makes me wonder if numbers aren't some sort of entity all their own that are, and something along those lines. And I've thought about that because you really can drill down into the center of reality and you find mathematics at work. I mean, you can, through an algebraic equation, ignite the fire that burns at the heart of our nearest star. You can, with squiggly lines that symbolize deeper symbols, send human beings, hairless apes, into outer space. I mean, it's symbolic on a chalkboard, on a whiteboard, but when you apply it, and it looks nothing like what it translates into.
Right.
And yet these symbols are very real things, and they translate into reality as spacecraft. It translates into whatever. So we've often talked about maybe numbers being something like that. And, so mathematics is definitely at the heart of reality. But I think similarly that story is at the heart of reality. And as the quote goes from whoever this elusive person is who said it, that reality, the world is not just made of atoms and matter, it's made of story. Because that's why the hero's journey story that Joseph Campbell wrote about extensively resonates pretty much across the board with everyone.
Right.
And it's like, because every life, we're all very similar. As much as we want to think of ourselves as being unique, we are unique, but we're also very, very similar. It's why the Finnegan's Wake is so interesting, because it's the same story being told like 1,000 times in this frenetic way. The main character's name is HCE, Here Comes Everyone, and it's meant to be the story of every hero, but told in this frenetic, frantic, almost psychedelic, trippy way. But it's the same story just being told from, 10,000 different perspectives. We all really do resonate with the same story. And even when we see like a story that's like the opposite or the inversion of a hero's journey, where someone fails or falls, that becomes a cautionary tale about how to not go the way of the person who, goes the wrong way, and how to stay on the path of the hero. It's like this story, I don't know if it's just epigenetically, uploaded into us now because it's been lived out so many times, and there's just grooves worn into the floorboards of the collective unconscious, and so we just kind of naturally tend this way now? I don't know. But from the very dawn of life, where that one lucky sperm makes its way to where it's supposed to make its way, that's a hero's journey when you look at it. Not to be gross or weird or anything, but I mean, it's pitfalls and perils, and there's one person who wins, and it ends up in the continuation of life. And we find ourselves living that narrative out over and over and over again, and it expands outward into our world. And so it's like that story is at the heart of reality. You cut the individual, and at the heart of the individual, they are living out that kind of a story. Okay, so if that's the truth, and I think it is, then one is a symbolic thinker. Like, I tend to think of myself as a symbolic thinker. I think in terms of symbolism. Like I've said so many times, when I watch a movie, I am actively looking for the symbols, you know, and I especially like them when they're not obvious. You know, I especially like them when it's not, you know, when it's not an obvious reference to like Jesus or something. You know, like a Christian movie. A Christian movie, the allegories are always over the top, clear and in your face. There's a guy named, you know, Joshua Christos, and he is, you know, and he comes from whatever, and it's so obvious. He's got a beard, and it's in a modern setting, but still, like, it's so obviously the same story, and he's unjustly killed, and he forgives, and you know, it's the story. I love it when it's very subtle, but the meaning bleeds through, because I think that's more what symbol is. Symbol is these things done over and over and over and over and over again throughout history that come together and condense into symbols, into signs, into things that they become things you can interact with. You click on that symbol like an icon on your desktop, and a world opens up to you. But in and of themselves, on the surface, when you look at them, it might not register that they mean any of those things. Like, I'm wearing a hat tonight. I'm wearing a hat because, well, it's really humid, and it was a futile attempt to make my hair do anything but like lay over my face. So I threw a hat up. But I'm not wearing a hat for this hat's original intended purpose, which is to protect the head, probably from the sun. Nobody really, I mean, some people do, but for the most part, we put on a hat for fashion reasons. And we've forgotten the meaning of hat. And we've forgotten what hatness is. We just do it. And that there's not really symbolism associated with that, but there are symbols associated with something like shaking the hand. If I walked up to you on the street and I put out my hand to shake your hand, and you put out your hand and shook mine, we are enacting an ancient ritual that peoples have been doing for millennia, but we don't know why. But we just know when we do that, it means something. And the firmness of the handshake, the confidence and the grip, all of those things, it could make or break whether you get the job, whether you get the promotion, whether this relationship continues on. We don't know why it's important, but it's important. But if you go back into history, anthropologically, one of the reasons we probably shake hands is because most people historically are right-handed. So the right hand is the way that you would most easily brandish a weapon. And so when you present your right hand to a stranger and you show them it's empty, and the other stranger clasps it with their right hand, you're showing, I'm not a threat. I don't have a weapon. I'm not here to harm you. I mean you no harm. I come in peace. So, but we still do it today, but we've forgotten the symbol. We've forgotten the symbol, what it means, where it comes from, where the intended meaning is. And yet somehow when we enact it, it's almost like all of that intention from millennia is uploaded and contained in that act still, and it still does something between people, even though we don't know why it does it. Right. And there's that great line. And it's not really a great line. But there's that line in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe where Lucy Pevensey, the youngest of the children who goes into Narnia, shakes hands with the fawn, Mr. Tumnus. And he's like, what do I do with it? And she's like, you shake it. And he's like, why? And she's like, I don't know. You know, and it's like, yeah, we don't know why we do this anymore, but we do it to show I'm not going to betray you. And the funny part about that is Mr. Tumnus does end up betraying Lucy. So in the forgetting of what the symbolism is, it ultimately does manifest itself in the opposite of what is meant to be enacted by the symbol. So it's almost like it works, but then there are times that you have to stop and say, what does that mean again? And the symbol has to die. It has to die and decompose, and the essence of the symbol is released back into the atmosphere, where you can experience it as something out here as opposed to something here. And then you can remember what the symbol was, what it symbolizes, and then you can bring it back into an action again. And I quote Paul Ricoeur here, who says, "An idol must die so that a symbol of being may begin to speak." And so here's the point I kind of wanted to make, and then we'll let it rip, is that we live in a world laden with symbols because we are a people who cannot help but live in a narrative structure and framework in some way. And our religions, be they Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, whatever, more modern New Age, kind of like hybrid spirituality, that's all a narrative. It's all a narrative. Even modern scientism, logic, reason, rationality, that is still a narrative structure. It is. It's all, there's all a story that's being lived out some way. It's important. What we've seen in modern times is, let's say, an assault, but I don't want to say it that way because I don't want to act like anyone's being persecuted, because most of us don't know what that is. But there has been something of an assault, in the softest sense of the term, on religion, let's say, on spirituality, by those who think themselves more rational and enlightened. And we did see a death, in a sense. And I had so many friends who were like, within 10 years, this will be dead. And I was like, are you out of your mind? You really think you've buried this? You know, do you think you've done away with this because, you know, you watched a few Richard Dawkins videos, or, you know what I mean? Like, come on now. But anyways, but I mean, that was kind of the mindset. And we really thought this is dead and buried. And now there's this reemergence in all avenues. I'm seeing it. And I don't know if you're seeing it too, maybe even in your practice, but I'm seeing it everywhere I look. A resurgence in Christianity, in alternative spiritualities, in all sorts of different venues and ways, but it's different. It seems different to me than it did before. And I think that's because the idol did die to the assault, and now the essence of it has been re-released. And it's almost like that moment where we're like, why did we shake hands? I don't know. And then you have an encounter with betrayal that reminds you why it's important to show yourself and your intentions up front, and then you can recapture the spirit of the symbol. Anyways, that was kind of the thought and the illustration that was capturing my mind today. And I'm curious what you think about that. And feel free to take this anywhere you want to take it, man. Okay.
Thanks, Jeff. I love talking to you because we've been exposed to a lot of the same information, so we kind of speak the same language. Like, I don't think there's ever been a time where you've brought something up and I've been like, what the heck? I didn't have any reference anywhere for what you were talking about. And I consider myself to be really, don't take this offense to this, I don't think you will, I consider myself to be kind of nerdy that way. Able to find someone else whose mind works the same way is just like such a joy. So some of the things that I love that you said is how symbols are not the reality themselves, but they point to a reality. And the first thing that came to my mind is we need symbols, we need stories, we need meaning, because reality or experience is incredibly elusive. And, you know, something that really helped me just in life in general, helped me become a better person, helped me deconstruct, helped me think about my life in a different way, was to realize that we have very little. I don't want to say we don't have any, because invariably I'll be wrong about that. But I would postulate that we have very little direct contact with reality. We have contact with reality through symbols. So you mentioned numbers as symbols. Well, language is also symbols, right? Letters symbolize sounds, but even the sounds themselves are symbolic. If you spoke Russian, for example, you could be saying all kinds of brilliant things that would be heartwarming or that I would want to connect with. But because we didn't have a shared language, or in the context of this conversation, a shared symbolism that pointed to that reality, we would not be able to connect. So you could be sharing something. If you're sharing it in a foreign language, I wouldn't be able to connect with the reality that you're trying to express, because I can't connect with this. I don't have the same symbology, if you will, that you have, right? And then that goes even deeper in my mind that when it comes to our shared experience, or more accurate, probably our experience of the experience, going back to the idea that I don't think we contact reality directly. We contact it through our experience, and everybody's going to have a little bit of an alteration in those experiences. Some people are going to have really big differences and alterations in the way that they have experience. But at the end of the day, there is this, what Bernardo Kastrup calls a dissociative boundary in consciousness. And I love how he talks about this. He talks about at some higher level, we are all one, right? But in our experience of that oneness, we experience a level of dissociation or dissociative boundaries in that one consciousness, to where whatever's going on with Jeff, I don't have access to unless Jeff self-reports that to me, unless Jeff talks to me about that. In the same way, nobody has access to what's going on with me unless I share what is happening. And so symbols are also bridges that allow us to open up and share that experience. To go back to what you were saying in the beginning, it's through that symbolism that the third thing that you were talking about emerges, right? Without the symbols, that third thing wouldn't be able to emerge. And then collectively, and this is where I think Carl Jung's idea of the collective unconscious and the archetypes in the collective unconscious, that also connects us within community. It connects us collectively. So it's one thing for you and I to sit down and have a conversation, but there are other symbols, like you mentioned, with shaking of hands, that connect us in community to where we have a shared understanding of that experience. Or in a religious context, if we understand the symbols, we have a shared reality. So where this really, and this was a big shift for me, and I've tried to talk about this in other videos that I've done or with other people, and I just feel, well, frankly, I just feel inept in trying to explain and express what I'm trying to express. But the biggest shift that happened for me was that I realized that the greatest error, the greatest lie that I was delving into when I was in fundamentalist religion, was the literal historical interpretation, taking that as the truth, as the standard for truth, the criteria for truth. Right. And so the shift for me was to realize, no, it's the symbols in the story. It's how I can read the story of Jacob and Esau. I remember we talked about that one time. I can read the story of Adam and Eve in the garden. I can read the story of Jacob and Esau. I can read the story of the passion, whatever it may be, right? And I can find my own story in that. I can find things that I can relate to within that. And so if I'm looking at it symbolically from a fundamentalist perspective, I'm in error. But in reality, because for them, the truth is the literal historical event that happened, right? But the symbol is speaking, I think, in a more powerful way, because it's speaking to the truth of my story. It's speaking to the core of human experience. And so I can embrace it in truth in that way. Now, I'll give you an example, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. But the work of Rene Girard, right, on his mimetic theory and the scapegoat and the forgiving victim and all of that stuff. He takes something that is deeply, deeply embedded in Western collective consciousness, which is the Passion of Christ, the story of the crucifixion, which predominantly in the Protestant world, and even to a really big degree in the Catholic world, the Latin world, right, Roman Catholic world and Protestant world in the West, has been interpreted as Jesus bearing our sin in some way and being necessary to reconcile humanity or for God's forgiveness, right? So Rene Girard is able to look at that same symbol and say, this is actually showing us how, as communities, we tend to scapegoat people, and especially scapegoat people who maybe are the truth tellers. So Jesus comes along and he tells the truth about the corruption of the religious system. He tells the truth about the corruption of the political system. To some degree, I guess you could argue the corruption of what's going on inside our hearts at times, right? And so he becomes the scapegoat in the sense that in at least one of the Gospels, it says, you know, it's better that we kill this one, or maybe it was an Acts, but it's better that one man die. It wouldn't be an Acts. I can't remember my address. But you know what I'm saying? It's better for one man to die rather than for a whole nation to die. So if we kill him, we're saving the nation. So he becomes the scapegoat, right? And then in the midst of that becomes a forgiving scapegoat. So is that what the author of John was thinking? I have no idea. Is that what the author of Matthew, Mark, or Luke was thinking? I have no idea. But I think it speaks to this idea that symbols can change. They can die. The ideas around the symbols can die, but the symbols themselves are quite resilient.
Yep.
Even if we
That's
bring
awesome.
in interpretations of them.
Yeah, I love it. For one, I love that you quote Castrop and Essentia. I didn't know you were into that as well. So we should have a conversation along those lines one of these days. I have a great conversation I want to have with somebody, and it's probably going to be you, called Altars and Altars. Altars with an ER and Altars with an AR.
Yeah, it'd be great.
I have a thought about the divine mind being fragmented and how God, who is I am, becomes the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the God of. God has his altars, as it's often called, only with an AR instead of an ER.
Love the concept. I'd love to
have a conversation with you about that one day, Aaron. So, anyways, nerding out again here. But on what you were just saying about, let's just say the Girardian theory and the scapegoat, and how a symbol dies, but the spirit of the symbol is very much still alive, and it's very durable. And so I'll read this quote. I had put this down. This is from Martin Buber's The Way of Response, and I love this quote of his on iconoclasm. He says, "Time after time, the images must be broken. The iconoclasts, which means the breaker of images, the smasher of idols, they must have their way. For the iconoclast is the soul in us which rebels against having an image that can no longer be believed in, elevated above our heads as a thing that demands to be worshipped. In longing for a God, we try again and again to set up a greater, a more genuine and more just image, which is intended to be more glorious than the last, and only proves the more unsatisfactory. The commandment, 'Thou shalt not make unto thee an image,' does not, of course, refer merely to sculpted or painted images, but to our fantasy, to all the power of our imagination as well. But we are forced time and again to make images and forced to destroy them when we realize we have not succeeded. The images topple, but the voice is never silenced. The voice speaks in the guise of everything that happens, in the guise of all world events. It speaks to all generations, makes demands upon us, and summons us to accept responsibility. It is of utmost importance not to lose one's openness, but to be open means not to shut out the voice. Call it what you will. It does not matter what you call it. All that matters is that you hear it." And so the symbolic, I think, is this welling up of this voice. And it wells up to a point that we're forced to articulate it at some point. We're just like, I can't get over this. I have to give shape and form to this. I have to give this spirit a body, because I have to be able to interact with it somehow. And so we do, and we make a quote unquote idol. But then the idol becomes a prison for the voice. And then we lose touch with the spirit of the thing. And that's when we have to be like, why do we shake hands? Why do we do this? We have to remember the symbol. So that's when we have to smash it. And when we smash it, the voice is let loose again. It's airborne. And now we can hear it, and it's there. It's in the trees. It's over here. It's over there. And now we're hunting for it again, and we get it, and we hold it close, and we experience it. And then eventually, again, we have to solidify it, give it form, give it shape. And we just keep doing this over and over and over again.
Right.
And in the context of what you were saying about the scapegoat imagery and about Jesus as the forgiving victim, and how the image of sacrifice, the symbol of sacrifice, does change. But even at the beginning, because you have Cain and Abel, and Cain rises up against Abel and murders him. And then it says he goes out after this event and he builds a city. Symbolically, the body of Abel is the symbolic foundation of the city he founds, and it's in his lineage that's listed, basically just this compounding vengeance, that
Yeah.
spirals out of control in this violence until you get to in the biblical narrative to the story of the flood, where the violence is so out of control, God has to basically open up the sky dome and recreate the heavens and the earth, and redo creation over again in the story symbolically. But so you have the foundation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it says in the book of Revelation that Jesus is the lamb slain from the foundations of the world. And Jesus says that he comes to reveal things hidden from the foundations of the world. So it's like he comes to liberate
Mm-hmm.
the spirit that was Cain's innocence in his own innocent crucifixion and resurrection. The symbol again comes back. You can smash it, you can do, but it's going to come back. And it's always more powerful upon its second return, or upon its return. And so, it's so powerful. And I wonder too, it's one of these things that really keeps me up at night. I mean, really, literally keeps me up at night. When we talk about the symbolic, we say, and I agree with you, we're talking about fingers pointing at moons. We're talking
Mm-hmm.
about a picture of my wife that isn't my wife. So you can throw the picture of my wife, and it might bother me, but if you physically put a hand on my wife, I'm gonna come at you. You know what I mean? Like it's a different level.
Right.
But then at the same time, the image I have in my head of my wife can at times be more real than the physical image that I interact with. If I go through a long period of time where we're away from each other, let's say, and I'm still interacting with her up here, that is almost more real than this. And it can almost get out of control sometimes. If the image up here is more real than the image out here, you're expecting things out here that aren't, realistic.
Absolutely.
So I wonder then sometimes too, I know we're talking about fingers pointing at moons, and I know we're talking about indicators, but is there a point also where the symbol becomes so concentrated that it does become real, in a sense, that it does take on a life of its own? In occult terms, you'd call this maybe an egregore. Walter Wink in The Powers That Be talks about the angels of the seven churches in Revelation, and he uses that symbolically to kind of say that there are these sort of thought structures that rule over a local assembly, so it becomes decoupled from the people, and it's almost its own autonomous thing now, even though it comes from them. It came as a projection, but now it's like a projectile coming down, and you can move the people out who projected it into being and move new people in, and it'll remain. And I know that might not be the same thing as symbol, but I think it could be, in a way. Yeah.
I think you're onto something. I think, it's like, you talked about algebraic equations, right? So one of the gaps, and I'm going to out one of my children, I won't say which one, but one of the gaps that was caused for one of my kids that's causing him problems with math right now was during the COVID times and stuff like that, and for some other reasons, he never memorized effectively his addition tables, subtraction tables, multiplication tables. And so it was identified, just this last year, that if he doesn't have those committed to memory, he's having to put too much thought power, too much thinking energy into these harder equations. Like, it's really hard to do multiple division if you don't know what 16 divided by 4 is, right? If you have to think that through and do all that work, it almost makes it impossible. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about what you said. So when someone says the symbol or the sign is not the event itself, in other words, it's a finger pointing at the moon, but it's not the moon, I would look at that as almost like memorizing your addition tables, right? Like, we need to understand that. But again, I think what you said, again, this comes to the nature of reality. What is the nature of reality? Like, do the symbols become real themselves? Are they reality themselves? I would say, of course, they're reality themselves. Of course they are. And can they take on this egregore sort of nature where it becomes a living entity that then almost interacts with us in some way? Right? That's how I understood what you're meaning to say. And I would say, of course, that's the case. But again, what's real. You bring up the image of your wife. That image is real.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that you recognize that it can become problematic, because this is something that we address in couples therapy. We actually address this, that you have what in psychology is called an introject. You take the image of the person and you internalize it, and you craft a story, a narrative based on your memories, based on your experiences, etc., and so on. And you can end up relating to the introject, and you can't not do it. It's not like this is bad or this is a wrong thing to do, but where it becomes problematic is when you forget that there's a person out there. And this is what a lot of abusers do. They create an idealized, particularly someone who clinically has what we call cluster B personality disorders, narcissism, borderline. One of the pitfalls that they can fall into is that the introject of the person becomes more real, and they idealize the introject. Mm-hmm. And then when the person out here that they're relating to doesn't live up to that symbol in their mind, that introject, then that's where conflict begins to happen, or in worst case scenarios, abuse begins to happen in the relationship, because the person is trying so hard to make that person match the symbol, because that symbol is more alive, that symbol is more powerful inside of them than the actual person themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what I would say about that is again, back to the hard problem of consciousness. And I've thought about this my whole life, Jeff. I remember being a kid. I remember learning colors as a kid, right? Preschool, kindergarten, orange, red, blue, green, and thinking to myself, how do I know that what I see as blue is actually what they see as blue? What if it's totally different? What if I could step into their mind and they see orange, but they learn to call orange blue?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or how do I know that when you taste coffee and I taste coffee, that we have the same experience?
Right.
What it's like to drink coffee, right? And so that's when I'm talking about reality being elusive, that's kind of a little bit of what I'm talking about. That that there can't be full confirmation of shared experiences, even on the most basic level. And so we experience those, we connect around those experiences through the power of symbols. And I think if we didn't have the power of symbols, there would be no cohesion whatsoever to our consciousness, to our lives, no ability to relate, no ability to interact, no ability to grow or to change. That's all dependent upon symbols, in my view. And so from that perspective, then, you see what I'm saying? It's almost like an algebraic perspective versus an addition. When I say I'm pointing to the moon, that's to help you understand the symbol isn't the thing itself, but it gets so much more complex than that for me.
Yeah, exactly. It's layers and layers of complexity. Yep. I agree with you 100%. I asked that question about that because I've often wondered, like, seriously wondered in the context of, well, we both come from a charismatic Christian background, right?
Right. Yeah.
I know you have. We've seen deliverances. We've seen demons cast out of people. We've seen all these kinds of things happen. We've seen quote unquote demonic manifestations. We've seen. I remember the house I grew up in. I've said it before. For 13 years, we experienced pretty much nonstop, constant haunting, for lack of a better term. Stuff that would scare the crap out of anyone. Just absolutely guttural, blood-curdling stuff. And it's funny because then certain people move into the same environments and don't have the same experiences. We came in as these hardcore charismatic Christians. So I'm getting way out into the weeds here, and I'm literally just thinking because I want to think with another like mind that I know isn't afraid to think these kind of thoughts.
Sure.
But there is a part of me that wonders sometimes how powerful the symbols we create are. And do these things, are they capable of literally clashing with other symbols to the point that they cause literal manifestations that at least appear, for all suits and purposes, to be outside of us, right? Does that make sense? Like, if we're all in this sort of connected web of consciousness, you know what I mean? And we all have these powerful charged symbols that we've we've prayed into being these powerful things that we almost carry with us. And then we encounter, look, even Paul talks about there being other Jesuses, right? Now, I know the metaphor of that. He's saying people talking about a Jesus who is different from the one that I've preached to you. But I mean, come on. There's something there. There's something to that even your own version of God in Christ, you can create a version of it that's so different from the one that I maybe have created and have generated, and that is supercharged in my own being, to the point where they come together, there can be literal friction, to the point where it looks like something demonic happening, and I even sometimes wonder, is that what we see manifest as the paranormal? And if I'll tell you a quick story, and I don't know if I've told you before, but it's one of the things that set me to really thinking about this, because I get over it. Still can't get over the experience. It was near the tail end of the lockdowns in COVID. And I had been actually quite nervous about life going back to normal, because I quite enjoyed the more quiet life that it afforded me. Like, I can relate to that. Yeah, I didn't like a lot of other stuff about it, but I loved being home with my family. I loved remote work. That part of it, I miss greatly. Other things, not so much. And, I had changed pretty deeply as a person over the course of those 2 years almost as well. And so I was really I was nervous and anxious about life returning to how it was before. So anyways, I fall asleep and I have this dream one night, and it was, to this day, and I've had a few really intense, life-changing dreams. This one, far and beyond, marked me. And so in this dream, I'm standing on this cliff, and I'm wearing like my mask, my like COVID mask, and I take it off, and I know it's symbolic of like the next phase, things changing, coming out of this season of quarantine and kind of unmasking myself. So, symbols, right? So I take the mask off, and when I take it off, it becomes like this glider in my hand, and I whip it around and put it behind me, and it becomes almost like a parachute. Like the thing that I was hiding behind now becomes this thing that the wind catches, and I'm flying. And I've had flying dreams before, but to this day, when I think about this, I get goosebumps. Like, it was so real, and I'm soaring and I'm flying, and I see myself flying above what I would consider my former Christian life. I'm seeing the different leaders who marked my life, and I'm seeing them doing what they were doing, and they're all beckoning me. There's like this stadium, this brutalist art looking stadium that they're all moving into. And there's like this booming voice they're all moving towards, and they're like, come on, come with us, come on. And it was almost like this siren call, and I was like, I don't want to go with you guys. I took this mask off for a reason. I'm different now. I can't follow that. Wow. And so I made a deliberate shift when I was flying and moved, and I start flying over their heads. And I don't mean to say this in any kind of superior way. I don't mean it like that at all. It was just, I knew I couldn't move in that flow. And I start moving in the opposite direction, and I feel this freedom like I have never felt before in my life. I'm like I said, to this day, talking about this dream, I'm getting goosebumps, because it was just one of those. So real. Yeah. And so I'm flying in the other direction, and I'm like, oh, I'm free. And then I catch, out of the corner of my eye, an image of the church I grew up in that my dad pastored. And I see it in the corner of my eye, and it's almost like it locks onto me with a tractor beam, and I'm pulled toward it. And I know I have to go there before I go anywhere else. And it pulls me in, and I find myself in the basement of this church. So I'm in something something below, and it's totally empty and dark, but I hear this song. I hear this like haunting song, two voices singing, male and female voices singing. I don't know if this is anima and animus or whatever. I don't know, but I'm hearing this, and I follow it to this old Sunday school room, and I open the door, and there's two kids in there. Two little kids, and they're singing this song. And then before my eyes, their face turns into this skeleton, like rider-waite deck skeleton. Look, that's what it looked like to me. It looked that's both of their faces take on that image. Yeah. And they both just start screaming, like screaming this awful, awful scream. And I am like jolted, and I'm literally jolted awake. And Aaron, I will not share this with my more religious friends, but I share it with you all here, and I share it with you. I kid you not. I just know this audience can handle this sort of thing. I open my eyes, and in the corner of my room, I see those same two figures floating above the floor, still screaming with the same image. I'm paralyzed in my bed. Like, and I understand this could be a sleep paralysis. I understand how that works. You know, I
Yeah,
get
sure.
that.
Sure.
But I mean, this it's the noise in particular, and I'm watching those things there, and it's like they're dying. And but the noise is so loud of the screaming. I get up out of my bed. The images are still there. I'm seeing them in my peripheral vision as I run past them, but the screaming is so loud. I'm afraid it's my kids.
Mm.
And I run to my daughter's room across the hall. She's
Yeah.
asleep. I run to my son's room across the hall. He's fine. I run down the 2 flights of stairs to my basement, to my daughter's room, my other daughter's room. She's fine. I'm still hearing it.
Mm-hmm.
I trudge back up to bed and I lay back down, terrified. The image is no longer there, and it's just there ringing in my ears.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, what the hell just happened? And it was after a couple of days of thinking about it, I truly found myself wondering if I did not feel like this freedom, this breaking away from this, like, true, because I really feel like I had done it before, but I felt like this was a true breaking away from the symbolic structure of this old world and a really going towards the symbolic structure of this new world. And I felt like there was a literal a butting of heads that happened between these two symbol structures. And that before I could really move fully into one, it was like that child of me, and I don't know if that's masculine, feminine, or what, that was in the basement, that those things literally like died, you know? And it was so real that I woke up and it's there and it's happening and I'm hearing it. And I mean, I was awake for 10 minutes hearing this in my ears. Like, I mean, I can still hear it. Like, it terrified me. Yeah. But I thought about it and I was like, I wonder how real was like the two Jesuses, let's say, that one I had encountered here, the one I encountered here when I was leaving. Was there such a real tearing of these symbols apart from each other because they were so real that it somehow was real? You know what I mean? It's not just a symbol up here. It was something real, something tangible, something, I don't know. And I know that's a lot to just throw out there, but that's why I ask you about that, because I feel like you're someone who I know has thought about these things, and I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, let me just get clear, because there's a lot there, and my brain is just going nuts with the symbolism. And I know enough about your story in 2020 that I'm connecting with other things that you've told me. But just to be clear on which part of the question do you want me to respond to, since we're running short?
Yeah, no. I mean, for one, anything you feel the need to comment on, but like, I'm curious, just again, I guess about the reality of how these symbols become real. The things that they become so real. And so like in that experience, they become so real that there is a manifestation when I'm tearing away from one and going toward another. There was like this literal metaphysical tearing that happens that then literally manifests in the physical in this form.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious because with all of the paranormal things we experience, how much of it could be the reality of how symbols condense, these experiences, these beliefs condense into these symbolic structures, and they're so real that one coming in contact with another or tearing away from another can cause literal, almost physical disruptions.
Got it. Yeah. So for me, where I've landed with all of this, and I may say something different a year from now if I'm growing and changing, right? But I really do think, mentioned the work of Bernardo Kastrup earlier. I really do think that base reality is consciousness or is mind. So we tend to think in the West that physical reality is base reality, and then everything becomes about how do we think about matter? How do we think about fields? How do we think about, time and space? Because that's objective reality. Everything else that's going on is subjective. If you flip that and say, no, consciousness is base reality. Mm-hmm. And then matter, the universe, time, space, fields is the byproduct or the expression, the physical expression of an underlying layer or level of consciousness that is behind that physical reality, right? Mm-hmm. Then of course, it's like you can't divorce the consciousness part from the physical part at all. And so I got to thinking about this. I was thinking about Deliverance too, because we saw some really powerful, undeniable stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? And there was definitely what we would have called back then for sure evil spirits that would respond to the name of Jesus or the prayers, right? And then I go to, I don't know if you've ever heard of Leanne Payne, but she was an Episcopalian lady who used to hold conferences at Wheaton College. And we went to one of her events, and there was a lot of more, like Catholic, more liturgical people there. And there were in the meetings what we would call back then demons manifesting. And they'd come lay a crucifix across their head or sprinkle holy water on them. Now, to a Pentecostal charismatic back in the 90s, I think you can relate to this. To me, I'm like, that's totally ludicrous, that
right, yeah.
Water,
no,
but
just the word. You just speak the word. You don't got to do that.
Yeah, you speak the word, use the name of Jesus. And then you discovered that there's shamanic deliverances where they use sage or they use rattles or other names of power, right? And then if you look at the East in the Tibetan tradition, I know there are these same kind of manifestations. So then you have to ask yourself the question, is it like we understood it to be literally the name of Jesus, or is it, so here's how I started thinking about it, and it ties into what
we got 2 minutes, by the way.
Okay, is it that there are, we talk about dissociative boundaries, that there are conscious beings, right, that exist in consciousness who are averse to whatever level of consciousness we're at, and so therefore the symbols of our level of consciousness creates a reaction or response to the entities that are coming from that level. And that's how I was able to make sense of that.
No, I like that line of thought, man. We need to continue this conversation because we opened a can of worms.
We did.
And we need to keep going with it because I really could keep going. But thank you for being on tonight, Aaron.
Thanks for having me.
Everyone in the chat, thank you for being here. I see all of our regulars here. Cody and Satori, I saw that you guys were on tonight. We love you. We love your work. Believe in you guys. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight for Soul School. This was awesome, Aaron. I love the conversation. Guys, please like and share the video. And again, please leave your well wishes and your prayers and your love to Andrea in the comments as well. And anyways, guys, thank you so much. I forgot to say class is in session. Damn it.
I was going to remind you too. I was going to remind you, and I forgot.
Thank you. And now I will say class is dismissed. Peace, guys. Good night.